Garrison Keillor is an American humorist who lives in Minnesota. And he often writes about a fictional town called Lake Wobegon. And this is the story about one of his characters. One day, one of the men from Lake Wobegon decided that he was having a heart attack. He had jumped into the shower, and he got this feeling in his chest, tight. And he had read an article one time in a magazine about a man who had had a heart attack who explained it about feeling like an elephant stepping on your chest. But this felt more like a big dog, and somebody whistled, and the dog got off. So it turned out not to be a heart attack, but for 10 or 15 seconds, he thought it was a heart attack. And so the more he thought about it, that's how it was. So as he was trying to finish his shower, he began to think about life and, having a new sense of values about, things. And he began to think, maybe I shouldn't take time for a shower today, life being so short and all. And then he got thinking, maybe I shouldn't go to church today, life being so short and all. Maybe I should go for a walk, good for the heart, worship God in nature with the grass and the flowers and the trees and the birds. But he ended up going to church anyway with his wife, out of habit, he decided. Well, it was during the season of Lent, and the minister's Lenten series was getting rather long. And so during the message, his mind began to wander about life and about what he'd accomplished in life and where he was in life and all those kind of things. And all of a sudden, by the inflections of the minister, he could tell that the end of the sermon was coming. And the offering was after the sermon. And so he slipped his wallet out of his pocket. No cash. So he got out a pen and he pulled out the emergency check that he had hidden in his Bible and nonchalantly tried to write a check out for the offering while still paying attention to the sermon. He wrote it out for $50. A little bit more than usual, but it was almost a heart attack, and now his offering was personalized, so And so the sermon came to an end, and the offering came, and he put his check in the plate and bowed his head. And as the basket went by, he noticed that he had written the check out not for $50, but for $5,000. Yes, there was $5,000 on the first line and $5,000 on the second line. And he'd been kind of moping around all morning long about, what was happening to his life, but now he was like fully alive. He had given the Lord everything he had and a little bit more. And he said, what's the man supposed to do? How am I going to live for the rest of the month? Well, that's going to be our question today. Are we just living, or do we have life and have it abundantly? Now, usually when I ask people, what do you need to live? The first thing they think about are the basic things, like food and clothing and shelter and all those kind of things. And we think about things because things make us feel content and make us feel secure. And we live in a consumer society, so we're taught that if we have things, we'll be happy. And so that's the first thing that we think of. But we realize that life is more than just our things. Things take our time and our energy and our attention, and they're not the most important thing in our life. And so then we start thinking about, we need relationships. A love interest, friends, children, colleagues. They all add to our life, and it makes our life more full. But we also realize that if we're not feeling very good about ourselves or what we're doing, friends aren't enough. When we're younger, we might think, just if somebody would just love me and care about me, then I'll be happy. But we realize it takes more than that. It takes more than just good relationships. The last thing that it takes for us to be fulfilled and feel fully alive is to be doing the things that we love, the things that bring us joy. So I think it's important on a day to ask, do you have life and have it abundantly? Are you doing things that you love? Are you doing things that bring you joy? And what things do you need to do more of to bring you joy? And what things do you need to do less? For about 4 years now, I've been reading a lot about a method called appreciative inquiry, which is a method that many people teach, and I happen to learn it from an Episcopal priest by the name of Dr. Rob Voyle, who happens to be both an Episcopal priest and a therapist. And he teaches that appreciative inquiry is the process of asking questions, of what kind of questions we spend our time asking. If we concentrate on problems, our problems get bigger. If we concentrate on positive things and solutions, life gets fuller. And so he teaches, and he and others teach that appreciative inquiry is about exploring and imagining things as they could be and living in that direction. And I found that pretty helpful in my life. So for myself, I find that every day is an opportunity to have life and to have it abundantly. So every day I ask myself, what's the most life-giving thing I can do today? And what should I do less of that's not life-giving? Now, we all know there's some basic things that we all have to do. Every week, somebody's got to take out the trash. It's not all that life-giving. But if we're doing things that give us life, then it's okay to take out a trash because that's only a small part of our life. So what are you doing that gives you joy, that gives you life, that you should spend more time on? Imagine what that could be and be thinking about that. You see, I think God wants us to have life and to have it abundantly. All what I read in the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament and everything written since, it's about God wanting us to have life and having abundantly. But there's always a but, isn't there? But God doesn't just sort of lay it out for us. We have to discover what gives us life and gives us joy. And what our faith in God does, it also makes us ask, not only when we ask the question, what is life-giving for us, but then we ask the question, what's life-giving, what I'm going to do be life-giving for somebody else and for the world? And so we all hold it in context. So when we all start thinking about what life-giving things should I be doing, the next question is, how's that going to affect everybody else? And how's that going to affect the world? You see, I think that's the difference between just surviving, living, and between thriving and having that sense of accomplishment, of joy in your life. I think Jesus today talks about life-giving things. Gabe just read just a small portion of a longer story in the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of John, Jesus goes back and forth to Jerusalem several times in his ministry. In the other Gospels, only once. And Jesus in the Gospel of John happens to be in Jerusalem during a festival. It's called the Festival of the Booths, or the Festival of the Tabernacles. And it's a 7-day faith festival that the Jewish faith celebrates every year to remind themselves of the time that their ancestors wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And so at that time, what they would do in Jerusalem is that during the festival, people would go out and live in tents to remind themselves that their ancestors were wanderers and that they had to wander around from place to place. And as part of the festival, every day, there would be a procession where the priest would gather some water out of a fountain and take it by processional up to the altar in the temple, and that would be part of their celebration of remembrance. And on the very last day, Jesus declared that he was the living water that came from God, and that everyone who believed in him would someday have the Spirit that would quench their thirst beyond their imagination. Well, as you can imagine, on the last day of the festival, there were not too many people to hear that kind of message. But it's an important message for us to hear because it reminds us that Pentecost is a day that we just don't remember how something happens. It's a day to celebrate that God is still with us, still today, helping us discover life-giving things so that we too can have life and have it abundantly. One of the things that happens when you're a minister is that you get to watch people's lives. And so you notice, for example, for our young people, that for our youth, they're really starting to to get a sense of who they are and what's important in their life and what they want to do and be in their life. And yet they're not quite sure, so they get influenced by other people. And sometimes they get coaxed into doing things that turns out to be not so life-giving in their life. And then I watch adults as they get into their careers and what they do. And sometimes I see people toiling at things that they don't find life-giving at all. And yet they do it because they think it's the thing they have to do. But it takes such a toll on their life. And then I watch as people retire and end their careers. And then they kind of wonder, what am I supposed to be doing with the rest of my life? And so if you ask, the question is, what do I really love to do? What brings me joy? And that question invites us to take the step and the courage to go off and do the thing that brings us joy. So when I watch people, what often happens is that what prevents them from doing those things is fear. Afraid of what might the consequences be, or what that has to do with their economic status, or other fears they have. And today is to allow the Spirit of God to speak to your heart and say, you are to have life and to have it abundantly. And let that life bring the Spirit into your life. About 200 years ago, there was the experience of pioneers who, in the southwest part of the country, when they went through a particularly dry area of the southwest on the way to California, as they emerged from of that area, discovered there was an old shack on the edge of the desert. And as they approached the shack, they noticed that there was a well out in front of the shack. One of those old hand pump wells that you can pump to make water come out, which was a pretty darn good sight as they came out of that hot area, all hot and dry and parched. But as they approached the well, they noticed there was a canteen on a rope around the well. And on the canteen, there was a note. And the note said, I'm Prospector Joe, and this here's my shack, and this here's my steak. And I've been having this, and I dug this well 20 years ago, and it's got good, clear, mouth-crunching water down below. But the cork in this pump gets mighty dry in this heat. And so you need to take the water in this canteen and pour it all down and prime the pump and start pumping. Don't go drinking the water in the canteen because the cork needs the whole thing. Drink your fill up the canteen, and leave the canteen for the next fella. Prospector Joe. And every person who came out of that hot, dry area held on to that canteen and looked at that well and had a decision to make. Every day, we have a decision to make. Are we going to just live, or are we going to have life and have it abundantly? God shows us how to have life and to have it abundantly each and every day when we trust in those ways and we allow the Spirit of God to help us. Amen.